Jake Morrison had always believed that life in Millbrook was predictable. Every morning, he'd walk the same route to McKinley High School, pass the same houses, and see the same faces. His senior year was supposed to be just like every other year, boring and ordinary. But that Tuesday in October changed everything. He was sitting in his usual spot in the back corner of astronomy class, doodling rocket ships in his notebook margins when she walked in. The girl was unlike anyone he'd ever seen at their small school. She had this almost glowing pale skin that seemed to catch light in a way that didn't make sense. Her dark hair fell in perfect waves, and when she looked around the classroom, Jake noticed her eyes seemed to shift from deep brown to almost golden, depending on how she turned her head. Mrs. Patterson, their astronomy teacher, smiled warmly and gestured toward the empty desks. Class, we have a new student joining us. This is Zara Chen. She's moved here from out of state, so please make her feel welcome. Jake watched as Zara's gaze swept across the room. There were plenty of empty seats closer to the front, spots where the popular kids usually saved space for their friends, but instead, she walked directly toward his corner and slid into the desk right next to his. She gave him a small smile that made his heart skip a beat. "Hi," she whispered, her voice having an unusual musical quality to it. "Mind if I sit here?" Jake nodded, probably a little too eagerly. He wasn't used to girls, especially pretty ones, choosing to sit near him. Most of his classmates saw him as the weird space kid who worked at the old observatory on weekends and spent lunch breaks reading astronomy magazines instead of hanging out by the lockers. During the lesson about stellar classifications, something strange happened. Mrs. Patterson was explaining how scientists categorize different types of stars when Zara quietly raised her hand. "Excuse me," she said politely, "but I think there might be a small error in the textbook. The information about blue giants seems outdated." Mrs. Patterson looked surprised. She'd been teaching astronomy for 15 years and rarely had students question the curriculum. "What do you mean, dear?" Zara opened her textbook and pointed to a diagram. "This chart shows blue giants having a certain temperature range, but recent observations have found several that burn much hotter than this suggests. The classification system might need updating." The teacher blinked, clearly caught off guard. Jake was impressed. He'd read extensively about astronomy and had never come across information that contradicted their textbook, yet Zara spoke with such confidence, as if she had personal knowledge of these distant stars. "Well," Mrs. Patterson said slowly, "I'll have to look into that. Thank you for bringing it to my attention." After class, Jake gathered his books and was surprised when Zara waited for him. They walked out together, and she seemed genuinely interested in continuing their conversation about stars. "You looked like you knew what I was talking about back there," she said, adjusting her backpack strap. "Do you study astronomy outside of class?" Jake felt his cheeks warm. "Yeah, actually. I work at the Millbrook Observatory on weekends. It's not much, just helping in the gift shop and sometimes assisting with public viewing nights. But I love it there." Zara's eyes lit up in a way that seemed almost literally bright. "That's incredible. I'd love to see it sometime, if you don't mind showing me around." They had lunch together that day, sitting at a table near the windows. Jake noticed that Zara had brought her own food in a strange metallic container. Nothing like the brown bags or plastic lunch boxes everyone else used. When he asked about it, she just said she had specific dietary needs and left it at that. What struck Jake most was how intently she listened when he talked. Most people's eyes would glaze over when he started discussing telescope specifications or explained the difference between various nebula types. But Zara hung on every word, asking thoughtful questions that showed she actually understood what he was saying. "Have you ever wondered if we're alone out there?" she asked, gesturing toward the sky visible through the cafeteria windows. Jake felt a familiar excitement bubble up inside him. This was his favorite topic, the question that had fascinated him since childhood. "All the time. I mean, the universe is so vast, with billions of galaxies and countless planets. The odds of Earth being the only place with life seem impossible. What if I told you That life exists in forms we can't even imagine? Zara asked, her voice taking on a dreamy quality. Species so different from us that we might not even recognize them as alive. I'd say that's exactly what I hope is true, Jake replied honestly. The universe would be pretty lonely otherwise. Something flickered across Zara's face then. An expression Jake couldn't quite read. It looked almost like relief, mixed with something deeper and more complex. The rest of the week passed in a blur of stolen conversations and shared glances across classrooms. Jake found himself looking forward to school for the first time in years. Zara seemed to enjoy his company just as much, always choosing to sit near him and seeking him out between classes. On Friday afternoon, as they walked toward the school parking lot, Zara surprised him with an invitation. Would you like to hang out this weekend? Maybe you could show me that observatory you mentioned. Jake's heart raced. He dreamed of having someone to share his passion with, but he never imagined it would be someone like Zara. The observatory is closed to the public on Sundays, but I have a key for inventory work. I could show you around if you want. I'd love that, she said, and the warmth in her voice made Jake feel like he was floating. Sunday evening arrived with clear skies perfect for stargazing. Jake met Zara at the observatory just as the sun was setting. The old building sat on a hill outside town, its distinctive dome silhouetted against the darkening sky. Jake had always felt peaceful here, surrounded by the tools humans use to explore the cosmos. As they approached the entrance, Jake pulled out his key, but before he could use it, Zara walked up to the electronic keypad beside the door and entered a code. The lock clicked open. Jake stared at her in confusion. How did you know the security code? Zara paused, looking almost startled by her own actions. I must have seen someone enter it earlier. Lucky guess, I suppose. It didn't make sense, but Jake was too excited about showing her the telescope to think too hard about it. They climbed the stairs to the observation deck, where the main telescope waited under its protective covering. As Jake removed the covers and began setting up the equipment, he noticed Zara watching his every movement with intense focus. She asked detailed questions about the telescope's specifications, questions that showed a deeper understanding of optics and mechanics than most people possessed. This is a beautiful instrument, she said, running her hand along the telescope's mount. Much more sophisticated than it appears from the outside. When Jake finally had everything ready, he invited her to look through the eyepiece he'd chosen. Saturn is their first target, knowing that the planet's rings never failed to amaze first-time viewers. But Zara's reaction was unexpected. Instead of the usual gasps of wonder he was used to hearing, she nodded thoughtfully and said, "The ring system is more stable than it appeared in the last survey. The shepherd moons are doing their job well." Jake blinked. Last survey. What do you mean? Zara seemed to realize she'd said something odd. I meant, from what I've read about previous observations, scientific papers, you know. But Jake had read every paper about Saturn he could find, and none of them used that kind of language. Before he could ask more questions, Zara pointed toward a seemingly empty patch of sky. Could you aim the telescope over there? I think we might see something interesting. Jake adjusted the telescope's position, though he couldn't imagine what she expected to find in that particular area. There were no bright stars or known objects in that direction, according to his star charts, but when he looked through the eyepiece, he saw something that made his breath catch. A cluster of faint lights moved in a perfect formation across the field of view, too organized to be natural, too coordinated to be satellites. What are those? He whispered. Zara's voice was soft when she answered, "Sometimes the universe shows us things we're not quite ready to understand." They spent the next hour taking turns at the telescope, with Zara pointing out phenomena that Jake had never noticed before despite years of observation. She seemed to know exactly where to look and when, as if she had some internal compass that guided her to the most interesting sights in the night sky. As they packed up the equipment near midnight, Jake felt like his world had expanded in ways he couldn't fully grasp. Zara had shown him wonders in his own backyard that he'd somehow missed, and her knowledge seemed to come from sources he couldn't identify. Walking back to their cars, Zara stopped suddenly and turned to face him. In the moonlight, her skin seemed to have that same subtle glow he'd noticed in class, and her eyes reflected the starlight in an almost unnatural way. "Jake," she said, her voice serious in a way he hadn't heard before, "I need you to know that I'm not from around here. Not in the way you might think." Jake laughed, assuming she was being playful. "Well, yeah, you transferred from out of state, right? Where did you move from exactly? You never really said." But Zara didn't laugh. Her expression remained intense, almost worried. "I've been looking for some." The week after their observatory visit, Jake couldn't stop thinking about Zara. Every time he closed his eyes, he remembered the way she'd known exactly where to point the telescope, how she'd spoken about Saturn's rings like she'd seen them up close. But whenever he tried to make sense of it, his logical mind pushed the thoughts away. She was just really smart, that's all. Maybe she'd studied astronomy more than she let on. At school, their friendship deepened quickly. Zara always saved him a seat at lunch, and they'd spend the entire period talking about everything from black holes to the possibility of parallel universes. What amazed Jake most was how she never made him feel weird for being so passionate about space. Instead, she encouraged him to share more, asking questions that showed she was genuinely interested in his thoughts and theories. "Have you ever considered that maybe we're looking at the stars all wrong?" she asked one afternoon as they sat under the old oak tree behind the school. "What if the patterns we see aren't random at all?" Jake looked up at the cloudy sky, wishing he could see the stars in daylight. "What do you mean?" Zara pulled out a notebook and began sketching. Her drawings were incredibly detailed, showing star formations that looked familiar yet somehow different from any constellation Jake knew. "What if the stars are trying to tell us something, like a map or a message? That's an interesting idea," Jake said, studying her drawings. Ancient people did use stars for navigation. But a message from who? Zara's pen paused over the paper. From anyone who might be watching. There was something in her voice that made Jake look at her more closely. She was staring at the sketches with an expression he couldn't read, almost like she was remembering something rather than imagining it. Their conversations weren't the only thing that felt different. Jake began noticing small details about Zara that seemed increasingly unusual. She never seemed to get cold, even when October turned chilly and other students bundled up in jackets. During their morning walks to class, Jake would shiver in his hoodie while Zara walked comfortably in just a thin sweater. One particularly cold morning, Jake mentioned it. "Aren't you freezing? It's like 30 degrees out here." Zara glanced down at her light clothing as if just noticing it. "Oh, I guess I just run warm. My family has always been that way." But when Jake accidentally brushed against her hand while reaching for his locker, her skin felt perfectly normal, not warm at all. If anything, it felt cooler than his own. The food thing was another mystery. Every day, Zara brought lunch in that same metallic container, and Jake never saw her eat anything from the cafeteria. When he offered to share his pizza one day, she politely declined, saying she had strict dietary restrictions. "Allergies?" Jake asked, concerned. "Something like that," Zara replied, but she didn't elaborate. Jake's curiosity was really sparked the day they had a surprise quiz in astronomy class. Mrs. Patterson handed out questions about distant galaxies and stellar phenomena that definitely wasn't covered in their textbook. Jake struggled through most of it, making educated guesses based on his reading outside of class. But when he glanced over at Zara's paper, he saw her writing detailed answers about galaxy formation and the life cycles of stars in distant clusters. Her responses included specific details about stellar temperatures and planetary compositions that Jake was pretty sure weren't taught at high school level anywhere. After class, he couldn't help asking, "How did you know all that stuff on the quiz?" Zara looked uncomfortable for the first time since he'd known her. "I read a lot of science magazines. My family moves around a lot, so I've had time to study different subjects." It was a reasonable explanation, but something about the way she said it didn't quite ring true. Jake decided to let it go, though. Maybe she'd gone to schools with more advanced programs. Or maybe she was just naturally gifted at science. That weekend, Zara asked if she could visit the observatory again. Jake eagerly agreed, excited to spend more time with her and shared his favorite place. This time, they planned to meet earlier in the evening so they could watch the sunset from the hill. As they climbed the winding path to the observatory, Jake noticed that Zara seemed to know the way perfectly. Even though she'd only been there once before in the dark, she walked confidently ahead of him, never hesitating at the turns or stopping to check if they were going the right direction. "You have a good memory," Jake commented as they reached the top. "I guess I just pay attention to my surroundings," Zara said, but she seemed distracted, looking up at the sky with an expression of concern. They set up the telescope as the last rays of sunlight faded away. Jake was adjusting the focus when Zara suddenly grabbed his arm. "Jake, look up there. Do you see those lights?" Jake followed her gaze and saw 3 bright points of light moving across the sky in a triangular formation. They were too bright to be satellites and moving too smoothly to be airplanes. "Probably just military aircraft," Jake said, though something about their movement pattern bothered him. "There's an Air Force base about 50 miles from here." But as they watched, the lights suddenly changed direction in a way that defied physics. They made a sharp 90-degree turn without slowing down, then accelerated until they disappeared completely. "Did you see that?" Jake whispered, his heart racing. Zara was very quiet. When Jake looked at her, she appeared almost scared, scanning the sky as if searching for something. "We should go inside," she said quickly. "It's getting cold." But it wasn't cold at all. If anything, the evening was unusually warm for late October. Inside the observatory, Zara seemed to relax a little. She helped Jake set up the telescope, and they spent the next hour looking at various objects in the night sky. But Jake noticed that she kept glancing toward the windows, as if expecting to see something. Around 10 o'clock, they decided to call it a night. As they were packing up the equipment, Jake's cell phone rang. The caller ID showed his mom's number. "Hey Mom, what's up?" "Jake, honey, are you still at the observatory? There are some strange reports on the news about unusual lights in the sky. I just wanted to make sure you're okay." Jake glanced at Zara, who had gone very still. "Yeah, I'm fine. We saw some lights earlier, but they were probably just planes." "Well, be careful driving home. They're saying there might be some kind of atmospheric phenomenon causing problems with electronics." After Jake hung up, he noticed that Zara looked genuinely worried. "Is everything all right, Jake?" she said slowly. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Of course. Do you trust me?" The question caught him off guard. "Yeah, I do." "Why?" Zara took a deep breath. "Because I think you're going to start noticing things about me that might seem strange. And when that happens, I need you to remember that I would never do anything to hurt you." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "What kind of things?" Before Zara could answer, the lights in the observatory suddenly flickered and went out completely. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in a dim red glow. The generator must have failed, Jake said, reaching for his phone to call the maintenance company. But his phone screen was completely black. He pressed the power button, but nothing happened. The device was completely dead, even though it had been fully charged. "That's weird," he muttered, then looked at Zara. "Can you try your phone?" Zara slowly shook her head. "Jake, I don't think this is a power failure," as if to prove her point. They heard a low humming sound coming from outside. It was unlike anything Jake had ever heard. Almost musical, but with an electronic quality that made his teeth ache. They moved to the window and looked out at the night sky. What they saw made Jake's breath catch in his throat. 3 disc-shaped objects hovered silently about 100 feet above the observatory, each one glowing with a soft blue light. "What are those?" Jake whispered. Zara's voice was barely audible when she answered. "They're looking for me." Jake turned to stare at her, his mind racing to process what she'd just said. "Looking for you? What do you mean?" But before Zara could explain, one of the objects began descending toward the observatory. As it got closer, Jake could see that it wasn't like any aircraft he'd ever seen. It had no visible engines or wings, and it moved with impossible silence. "Zara," he said, his voice shaking. "What's happening?" "Who are you?" She turned to face him, and in the strange light coming through the windows, Jake saw that her eyes were glowing with the same soft blue radiance as the objects outside. "I wanted to tell you," she said, and there were tears on her cheeks. "I wanted to tell you so many times, but I was scared you wouldn't understand." The humming sound grew louder, and Jake felt a strange tingling sensation in his fingertips. Everything electronic in the observatory had stopped working, but somehow he could sense the presence of the objects outside, as if they were calling to him. "Tell me what," he managed to ask. Zara reached out and took his hands in hers. Her touch sent that same tingling sensation through his entire body. But instead of being frightening, it felt oddly comforting. "Jake, I'm not from Earth," she said. Simply, "and I think you might not be entirely human either." Jake stared at Zara in complete shock. The words she'd just spoken seemed to echo in his mind. But they didn't make any sense. Not from Earth, not entirely human. His logical brain tried to find reasonable explanations, but the glowing objects outside the observatory window made it impossible to dismiss what was happening. "I don't understand," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the humming sound that filled the air. Zara's eyes, still glowing with that strange blue light, were filled with worry. "I know this is overwhelming. I never wanted you to find out this way." The nearest object descended until it was hovering just outside the observatory. Through the large windows, Jake could see its smooth surface reflecting the starlight. There were no seams, no visible doors or windows, nothing that looked like traditional aircraft design. "Those things out there," Jake said, pointing toward the window, "they're connected to you somehow." Zara nodded slowly. "They're from my world. My people have been watching Earth for a very long time, studying your species, learning about your culture and biology." Jake felt his legs go weak. He sank into a nearby chair, trying to process what she was telling him. "Your people? You mean there are more like you?" "Many more," Zara said, moving closer to him. "Jake, I need you to listen carefully because we probably don't have much time. My species is in trouble. Our planet is dying, and our population has become too small to survive on our own." The humming sound changed pitch, becoming more urgent. Zara glanced toward the window, then continued speaking quickly. "For generations, we've been searching for compatible species that could help us survive. Earth was identified as a potential source of genetic diversity, but we needed to study humans carefully to understand if cooperation was possible." Jake's mind raced with questions. "So you've been spying on us?" "Not spying exactly," Zara said, "more like carefully observing. We needed to understand if humans could accept us, if there could be genuine connections between our species." She sat down across from him, her expression intense. "Jake, some humans carry genetic markers that make them compatible with my people. These markers usually show up in individuals who have strong intuitive understanding of mathematics, astronomy, or physics. They're drawn to the stars in ways they can't fully explain." Jake felt a chill run through him. His passion for astronomy, his ability to understand complex concepts that other students struggled with, the way he'd always felt like he didn't quite fit in with his peers. "You're saying I have these markers?" "I've been studying your responses, your abilities, the way you process information about space and celestial mechanics," Zara said. "Everything about you suggests you carry these genetic traces." The object outside began projecting a beam of soft light toward the observatory. Where the light touched the building, Jake could see the walls becoming transparent, as if the entire structure was turning into glass. "What's happening?" he asked, standing up quickly. "They want to meet you," Zara said. "My commander is aboard that ship. When I was sent here to observe and report back, I wasn't supposed to make direct contact with anyone. But then I met you, and everything changed." Jake watched in amazement as a figure began materializing in the center of the observatory. The light beam seemed to be transporting someone directly through the walls. Within moments, a tall figure stood before them, wearing a form-fitting silver suit that seemed to shimmer with its own internal light. The being looked similar to Zara but older, with the same pale, luminescent skin and shifting eye color. When it spoke, Its voice had the same musical quality as Zera's, but with a deeper, more authoritative tone. 07, the figure said. You have violated our primary directive by revealing yourself to the subject, Commander Thyrion. Zera replied, standing straighter. I believe this individual represents exactly what we've been searching for. Jake felt like he was watching a movie, except everything was happening to him. Subject. Is that what I am to you? Commander Thyrion turned to study Jake with intense curiosity. Human designation Jake Morrison. Your genetic profile indicates significant compatibility with our species. However, 07's emotional attachment compromises the objectivity of this assessment. Emotional attachment. Jake looked between Zera and the commander. Zera's cheeks flushed, making her skin glow even brighter. Jake, among my people, we have a concept called soul binding. When we find someone whose mind and spirit perfectly complement our own, we declare them our forever. It's deeper than what humans call love. It's a recognition that two beings are meant to share their existence across lifetimes. Jake felt his heart racing. And you think I'm your forever? I don't think it, Zera said, stepping closer to him. I know it. From the moment I saw you in that classroom, I felt the connection. Every conversation we've had, every moment we've shared, has only made it stronger. Commander Thyrion made a sound that might have been disapproval. Personal feelings cannot influence our mission. The survival of our species depends on making logical choices based on genetic compatibility and adaptive potential. But that's exactly my point, Zera said, turning to face her commander. True compatibility isn't just about genetics. It's about minds that understand each other, spirits that resonate on the same frequency. Jake has shown me that humans are capable of the deep connections we need for successful integration. Jake's head was spinning. Integration. What does that mean? Commander Thyrion answered before Zera could speak. It means joining our community, undergoing genetic modification to extend your lifespan and adapt your biology to function in our environment. It means leaving Earth permanently and becoming part of our efforts to rebuild our civilization. Weight of what they were suggesting hit Jake like a physical blow. Leave Earth, leave his mother, his friends, everything he'd ever known. I need time to think about this, he said. Time is something we have very little of, Commander Thyrion replied. Our ships must leave the system within 3 of your Earth days. Other human governments have detected our presence and continued exposure risks both our species. Zera moved to Jake's side. I know it seems impossible to decide something this big so quickly, but Jake, think about what your life could become. My people have technology that could let you explore the galaxy, visit worlds beyond your imagination. You could study phenomena that human science won't discover for centuries. Jake looked out at the other glowing objects in the sky. And if I say no, then we leave. And you return to your normal life, Commander Thyrion said, though we would need to modify your memories to protect our secrecy. You'd erase my memories of Zera, all memories of contact with our species, yes. The thought of forgetting Zera, of losing the connection they built, felt worse than the fear of leaving Earth. But how could he abandon his mother, his entire world? There's another option, Zera said quietly. I could stay on Earth with you. Commander Thyrion's expression darkened. That would mean exile from our people, Zera 7. You would never be able to return home, and without the resources of our civilization, your extended lifespan would be wasted. Some things are more important than longevity, Zera replied, taking Jake's hand. Jake felt the familiar tingling sensation at her touch, but now he understood what it meant. It was some kind of biological recognition, a sign that their nervous systems were compatible in ways that went beyond normal human experience. How long do I have to decide? He asked. 2 days, Commander Thyrion said. We will remain in orbit until then. Zera 7 may stay with you to help explain what life among our people would entail, but she must return to the ship before we depart. The commander began to fade, the light beam reversing the transportation process. Choose wisely. Jake Morrison, this opportunity will not come again. After the commander disappeared, Jake and Zera were left alone in the observatory. The other objects in the sky moved away. though they remained visible as distant points of light. "I'm sorry," Zara said, still holding his hand. "I never wanted you to feel pressured or scared." Jake looked at her, really looked at her, trying to see past the human appearance to the alien being underneath. But all he saw was the girl, who had listened to his dreams about exploring space, who had shared his passion for understanding the universe, who had made him feel less alone than he'd ever felt in his life. "Zara," he said, "when you say I might not be entirely human, what exactly do you mean?" She squeezed his hand gently. "I mean that somewhere in your ancestry, there was contact between your bloodline and beings like me. It might have been generations ago, but the genetic markers are still there. It's why you understand concepts that should be beyond human comprehension. Why you're drawn to the stars, why you can feel the connection between us." Jake thought about his mother, how she'd always encouraged his interest in astronomy even when other parents thought it was just a phase. He thought about his father, who had died when Jake was young, and how his mother always said he had an unusual fascination with the night sky. 2 days. He said, 2 days, Zara agreed. As they left the observatory together, Jake looked up at the distant lights in the sky and realized that no matter what he decided, his life would never be the same again. Jake barely slept that night. He lay in his bed staring at the ceiling, replaying everything that had happened at the observatory every few minutes. He'd get up and look out his bedroom window, searching the sky for signs of the alien ships. They were still there, barely visible as faint points of light, but knowing what they were made, his heart raced every time he saw them. The next morning felt surreal. He sat at the breakfast table with his mom, eating cereal and watching her read the morning news on her tablet, just like they did every day. But everything felt different now. How could he explain to her that aliens were real, that one of them had fallen in love with him, and then he had less than 2 days to decide whether to leave Earth forever? "You look tired, honey," his mom said, glancing up from her tablet. "Did you stay up till late at the observatory again?" Jake almost choked on his cereal. Something like that. His mom, Linda, had always been supportive of his astronomy hobby. After his dad died when Jake was 12, she worked extra shifts at the hospital to pay for his telescope and books about space. She'd driven him to science competitions and never complained when he spent entire weekends stargazing, instead of hanging out with friends his age. Looking at her now, with her tired eyes and the worry lines that had appeared after years of raising him alone, Jake felt his heart breaking. How could he even consider leaving her? "Mom," he said carefully, "do you ever think about Dad? About what he would have wanted for me?" Linda set down her tablet and gave him her full attention. "All the time." "Why do you ask? Did he ever say anything about me being different somehow? Special?" His mom smiled sadly. "Your father always said you had an old soul, that you understood things other kids your age couldn't grasp. He used to joke that you came from the stars." She paused, studying Jake's face. "Is everything okay? You've been acting strange lately." Before Jake could answer, his phone buzzed with a text from Zara. "Can we meet at the park before school? I want to show you something." Jake found Zara sitting on their usual bench near the duck pond. She looked tired too, and there was a sadness in her expression that he hadn't seen before. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked, sitting down beside her. "My people don't sleep the way humans do," she said. "But I spent the night thinking about everything I'd be giving up if I stayed on Earth, and everything you'd be giving up if you came with me." She pulled a small device from her pocket that looked like a crystal sphere. "I wanted you to see what my world is like before you make your decision." Zara touched the sphere, and suddenly the air above it filled with moving images, like a three-dimensional movie playing in front of them. Jake saw incredible cities that seemed to float in space, connected by bridges of light. The architecture was unlike anything on Earth, with buildings that curved and flowed like living things. "This is my home," Zara said softly. "The planet Kepler-4 for to be, though we call it Ethros. We've lived there for over 10,000 of your years." The images changed to show vast libraries filled with knowledge from across the galaxy. Laboratories where beings worked on technologies that seemed like magic. and gardens where plants from dozens of different worlds grew together in perfect harmony. It's beautiful, Jake whispered. But it's dying, Zara continued. The images shifted to show empty cities, withered landscapes, and the few remaining members of her species working desperately to preserve their civilization. Our population dropped below sustainable levels 3 generations ago. Without new genetic diversity, we'll be extinct within a century. Jake watched the images with growing understanding. That's why you came to Earth. That's why we came to hundreds of worlds, Zara corrected. But Earth is special. Humans have something we lost long ago. The ability to dream beyond what seems possible. To take risks for the sake of discovery. That's what we need to survive. The images faded, and Zara put the device away. Jake, if you come with me, you won't just be saving my people. You'll be helping to create something new. A combined civilization that could explore the entire galaxy. They walked to school together, but Jake could barely concentrate on his classes. Every time he looked at Zara, he thought about the incredible future she was offering him. But every time he thought about his mom eating dinner alone, or missing his graduation, or never knowing what happened to him, he felt sick to his stomach. During lunch, his best friend Tommy sat down at their table. Tommy had been Jake's friend since elementary school, and he was one of the few people who didn't think Jake's obsession with space was weird. "Dude, you look terrible," Tommy said, unwrapping his sandwich. "And who's the new girl? You've been spending a lot of time with her lately." Jake glanced at Zara, who was sitting quietly beside him. "Her name's Zara. She's really special." "Special how? Like, you're dating her special, or she's secretly an alien special?" Jake nearly choked on his drink. "What?" Tommy laughed. "Relax, man. It's just that she's got this whole mysterious vibe going on. Plus, she knows more about astronomy than our teacher. I'm starting to think she might actually be from outer space, if only he knew." Jake thought, "Tommy, if you had to choose between staying here with your family and friends, or going somewhere incredible but never being able to come back, what would you do?" Tommy considered this seriously. "That's a tough one. I guess it would depend on how incredible we're talking, and whether I'd be going alone or with someone I cared about." After school, Zara asked if Jake wanted to visit the observatory one more time. As they walked up the hill, she told him more about what life would be like among her people. "The process of adaptation takes about a week," she explained. "Your cellular structure would be modified to handle different atmospheric conditions and gravitational fields. Your lifespan would be extended to match ours. We typically live for about 800 of your years." "800 years, Jake. Stop walking. That's impossible." "Not impossible, just different. Think about all the things you could learn, all the places you could explore in 8 centuries. You could witness the birth and death of stars, see civilizations rise and fall, maybe even help discover new forms of life." They reached the observatory as the sun was setting. Jake looked up at the sky, knowing that somewhere up there, Commander Tharian and the other aliens were waiting for his decision. "Zara," he said, "what happens to you if I say no and you stay on Earth?" She was quiet for a long moment. "I would live out a normal human lifespan. Maybe 60 or 70 more years. I'd age like a human, die like a human, and I'd never see my home again. But you'd be happy." Zara turned to look at him, and her eyes began to glow with that soft blue light. "Jake, I've spent my entire life following orders, doing what was expected of me for the good of my species. But these past few weeks with you have been the first time I've ever felt truly alive. If staying on Earth means I get to spend whatever years I have left with you, then yes, I'd be happy." That evening, Jake sat in his room with a piece of paper, trying to write a letter to his mom. He'd started it a dozen times, but every attempt sounded either crazy or inadequate. How do you explain to someone that you're leaving the planet? Around midnight, he heard a soft tapping at his window. Zara was floating outside, glowing faintly in the darkness. "How are you doing that?" he whispered as he opened the window. "My people can manipulate gravitational fields to a limited degree," she said, drifting into his room. "It's one of the abilities you gain after the adaptation process." She looked around his bedroom. taking in the astronomy posters on the walls, the telescope in the corner, the model rockets on his shelves. This room tells the story of someone who's always dreamed of reaching the stars. Dreams and reality are different things, Jake said. Are they, Jake? Tomorrow night is our last chance. Commander Thyrion won't wait any longer after that. Whatever we decide, we have to decide together. Jake looked out his window at the night sky, then back at Zara. In less than 24 hours, he would have to make the most important decision of his life. He just wished he knew what the right choice was. Will you stay with me tonight? He asked. I don't want to spend our last night on Earth apart. Zara smiled, and for a moment, she looked like any other teenage girl dealing with complicated feelings. I'd like that, as they sat together looking out at the stars. Jake realized that no matter what he chose, nothing would ever be simple again. The final day arrived faster than Jake had expected. He woke up knowing that by nightfall, his entire life would either completely change or return to normal forever. The weight of that knowledge made even simple things like brushing his teeth feel strange and important. At breakfast, his mom seemed to sense something was different. She kept glancing at him over her coffee cup, and finally she set it down and reached across the table to touch his hand. Jake, I need you to know that whatever's going on with you lately, whatever big decision you're struggling with, I trust you to make the right choice. You've always been wiser than your years. Jake felt tears starting to form in his eyes. Mom, I love you. I need you to always remember that. No matter what happens. Linda looked worried now. Honey, you're scaring me a little. Is everything okay? Before Jake could answer, his phone buzzed with an urgent text from Zara. Military vehicles heading toward the observatory. We need to meet now. Jake's heart started racing. I have to go, Mom. There's something I need to take care of. Jake. Wait, but he was already grabbing his jacket and running out the door. As he rode his bike toward the observatory, he could see black SUVs with government license plates driving up the winding road ahead of him. Somehow, the authorities had figured out where the alien ships were hiding. He found Zara waiting for him at their usual spot behind the building, but she looked different. Her skin was glowing brighter than he'd ever seen it, and there was an urgency in her movements that made his stomach clench with worry. They know we're here, she said as soon as she saw him. Commander Thyrion says human military forces have been tracking our energy signatures. We have to leave now, tonight, or risk being captured. Jake looked up at the sky, where he could just barely make out the shapes of the alien vessels. What happens if they catch you? Best case scenario, we become subjects for your government's experiments. Worst case, they try to use our technology as weapons. Zara grabbed his hands. Jake, I know we plan to have until tonight, but there's no more time. I need to know your decision right now. The sound of helicopter rotors began echoing across the valley. Jake could see military aircraft approaching from the east, still several miles away but closing fast. If I come with you, Jake said, what happens to my mom? She'll never know what happened to me. We could send a message to your mother explaining that you're safe and that you chose to leave. Zara offered. It wouldn't tell her everything, but it would be better than just disappearing. Jake thought about his mom receiving a message saying he'd left Earth voluntarily. She'd spend the rest of her life wondering if she'd failed him somehow. If there was something she could have done differently, that's not good enough, he said. She'd blame herself forever. The helicopters were getting closer. Zara looked up at the sky, and Jake could see a beam of light beginning to descend from one of the ships. The transport beam is activating, she said. Jake, in 30 seconds, I'll either be on that ship heading back to Ethros, or I'll be staying on Earth with you permanently. But I need to know which one it's going to be. Jake closed his eyes and tried to imagine his life without Zara, going back to his regular routine, pretending that none of this had ever happened, slowly forgetting the incredible connection they'd shared. Then he tried to imagine leaving everything he'd ever known behind, traveling to a distant world, and building a completely new life among beings he'd never met. Both futures seemed impossible in their own way. Zara, he said, opening his eyes. When you first told me you weren't from Earth, you said you thought I might not be entirely human either. That's right, Your genetic markers suggest no. I mean, really think about it. My dad was fascinated by astronomy just like me. He always seemed to know things about space that he couldn't explain. And my mom always said I was different from other kids, that I understood things I shouldn't have been able to understand. Zara's eyes widened as she realized what he was suggesting. You think your father might have had contact with my people, or people like them. Maybe that's why I feel so connected to you. Why I can sense things about the universe that other humans can't. The transport beam was getting brighter, and Jake could feel that familiar tingling sensation in his fingertips. But this time, it felt different. It felt like the universe itself was calling to him. Jake, we have to decide now, Zara said urgently. He looked at her, really looked at her, and suddenly everything became clear. This wasn't just about choosing between Earth and Ethros. It was about choosing who he really was. I have an idea, he said quickly. What if we don't have to choose between staying and leaving? What if there's a third option? What do you mean? Your people need genetic diversity to survive, right? And humans need to know that we're not alone in the universe. Instead of me just leaving with you, what if we work together to create a bridge between our worlds? Zara looked confused. How would that work? I stay on Earth, but not as a normal human. I undergo enough of the adaptation process to extend my lifespan and gain some of your abilities. Then I become an ambassador, slowly preparing humanity for contact with your species. When Earth is ready, we can establish formal diplomatic relations. The helicopters were almost overhead now, and Jake could hear vehicles surrounding the observatory. But the transport beam continued to descend, giving them precious extra seconds. Jake, that's incredibly dangerous, Zara said. If your government discovers what you are before humanity is ready for the truth, they could imprison you or worse. But if it works, both our species benefit. Your people get the genetic diversity they need through voluntary cooperation instead of secret observation, and humans get to join the galactic community instead of being kept in the dark. Zara considered this quickly. Commander Thyrian would never approve such a plan. Then we don't ask permission. We just do it. The transport beam reached them, and Jake felt his feet leaving the ground. But he wasn't being pulled upward toward the ship. Instead, he felt like he was being held in a bubble of light, safe from the chaos erupting around them. Double quotes Zara. I trust you completely, he said. If you think we can make this work, if you think I can become something more than human without losing what makes me human, then I'm ready. Zara smiled, and her entire being seemed to glow with happiness. Jake Morrison, among my people, when someone offers to share their life with you across centuries and across worlds, when they're willing to become something new for the sake of love and hope, we have a ceremony. Even as military forces surrounded the observatory below them, even as Commander Thyrian's voice echoed from the ship above demanding an explanation, Zara took Jake's hands and spoke words in her own language that sounded like music. Then, in English, she said, Jake Morrison of Earth, I declare you my forever, my partner across time and space, my companion in whatever form our lives may take. Jake felt a warmth spread through his entire body, starting from where Zara touched him and radiating outward. He could sense his cellular structure beginning to change, his perception expanding, his connection to the universe deepening. Zara, Chen of Ethros, he said, the words coming to him as if he'd always known them. I accept the bond of forever, and I choose to build a bridge between our worlds. The transport beam suddenly intensified, but instead of pulling them up to the ship, it began transforming Jake right there in midair. He could feel his DNA rewriting itself, his lifespan extending, his consciousness expanding to encompass knowledge and abilities he'd never dreamed of. When the light faded, Jake and Zara were standing back on the ground, but everything had changed. Jake could see energy patterns in the air around them, could sense the electromagnetic signatures of every piece of technology for miles, could feel the gravitational pull of distant planets. How do you feel? Zara asked. Jake took a deep breath and realized he could taste the chemical composition of the atmosphere. Like I'm finally who I was always meant to be, above them. Commander Thyrian's ship began to retreat, but not before sending a final message that Jake could somehow understand. Despite it being in an alien language, the bridge builder's path has been chosen. May it lead to prosperity for both worlds. The military forces that had surrounded the observatory found nothing but two teenagers standing in an empty field, with no trace of the mysterious energy signatures they'd been tracking. 6 months later, Jake received a letter of acceptance to meet with a full scholarship for astrophysics. His professors were amazed by his intuitive understanding of advanced concepts, his ability to predict astronomical phenomena, and his theories about interstellar communication. His mom was proud, but not entirely surprised. "I always knew you were destined for great things," she said. "Your father would have been so proud." Jake smiled, knowing that somewhere among the stars, Zara's people were slowly making their way back toward Earth, preparing for the day when humanity would be ready to learn they weren't alone. And in his dorm room late at night, when he looked up at the stars through his enhanced vision, Jake could see the lights of distant civilizations and know that someday he would help bring them all together. He had chosen forever, and forever had chosen him back.